Brendan, Time Traveler. Can Love Last Forever? An audiobook written by Brendan Connolly. Read for you today by Paul Carlin. Before there was life on Earth, a long time ago, there were a lot of planets with life on them. But there was a great explosion deep in space. This was causing life to end on most of the planets. But there was one planet that just about survived. We know it as Mars. The explosion caused a wave of heat and energy, causing life on planet to end. But Mars had a shelter underneath its surface. They had food and supplies. Some survivors made it to Mars before the wave hit. There were 2 survivors that made it to Mars before the wave hit. Their names were Princess Anna and Space Pilot Mark. Space Pilot Mark was out training Princess Anna to fly the spaceship when the explosion happened. They knew the wave would end life on their planet, so they put out an emergency call. The people on Mars picked up their emergency call on their radio receivers. They told Princess Anna and Space Pilot Mark to go to Mars and they would let them into their shelter. Princess Anna and Space Pilot Mark's guiding system on their ship guided them to Mars. When they got there, they were told to go into the big cave at the side of the mountain. They flew for 20 miles into the cave. They came to a big lift, and they were told to fly into it. The lift went down deep under the ground, and it opened up, and they flew into a big landing bay. They landed the ship, and they got out. The leaders met them. He then takes them to a city in a big chamber. The chamber is held up by huge pillars. There was an artificial sun. There were trees and buildings for 100,000 survivors to live in. The rest of the survivors were put into an unconscious state and then transferred into hibernation tanks. Princess Anna and Space Pilot Mark lived happily for many years in the shelter under Mars's surface with the people of Mars. They fell deeply in love with each other. Space Pilot Mark was given the job of ship mechanic. He helped to look after the fleet of ships. One day, they got a stress call from a small ship. The pilot on the ship was named Brendan. He was a time traveler. Brendan asked for permission to go down into the shelter. The leaders gave Brendan permission to go down to the shelter. They told him to fly into the cave, and when he got to the lift, to go into it. Brendan did this, and when he got to the lift, he went down through the shaft, and the lift opened up at the ship hangar. Brendan flew into the ship hangar, and he landed the ship on the landing pad. The ship opened up, and a little green man got out, and he met the leader of the shelter and Mark. The leader and Mark introduced themselves to the little man. He told the leader and Mark that he was a time traveler. Mark asked the time traveler his name. The time traveler told him that he was known in some time zones as Huros, but he liked to be known as Brendan, the time traveler. The leader told Brendan that Mark would fix his ship. Brendan asked the leader, would he let Mark help him build a new ship? The leader said to Brendan he would have to bring it up with the council, and if it was okay with them, it would be okay with him. Just then, Mark and the leader heard a noise coming from the ship. They turned their heads, and they saw a little purple animal. It was the size of a small dog. Mark and the leader got a fright, and Brendan said, "It's okay. It's only Einstein. He is my friend." The leader went to the council, and he told them what Brendan had asked him. He told the council that Brendan was the doctor. When they heard this, they said yes, and they wanted to talk to Brendan alone. The leader went back to Brendan and asked would he talk to the council. Brendan said yes, he would talk to the council. The leader told Brendan that the council knew who he was. Brendan said that was okay. The leader and Brendan went to the Great Hall, and Einstein followed them. The leader told Brendan to go into the Great Hall, and Einstein went with him. The Great Hall was round inside. Brendan and Einstein were in the center of the room, with the council around Brendan and Einstein. The council was made up of men and women. They asked Brendan for help. They told Brendan that the shelter only had 5 years of power left in the reactor. And was there anything he could do to help them? Brendan said yes. There was a machine he could build that would collect your particles when you die. The council then asked, how would collecting the particles help the people of Mars when they die? Brendan answered, the machine would collect the life particles, enabling him to contain them and put them into a probe, or bring them to a new planet and start life on that planet, enabling the life particles to enter a new host and enabling the people of Mars to live forever as long as there is life on the planet. The council then said they would let Brendan go ahead and build the machine, and they would give their top scientists and engineers to help build the machine. But Brendan answered no. He only wanted help from Mark. The council said, okay, but we hope you have enough time to get the machine built. Brendan answered, I will. It is my destiny to do this. Brendan and Mark got started on the machine and the new ship. Mark asked Brendan, what does the machine do? Brendan told Mark that the machine would collect the life particles when you die. The machine would store the particles until he could put them into a probe. And when he had got all the particles from everyone and put them into the probe, he would bring them to a planet he knew of. It is frozen and it has no sun, but I know how to make sun by nitrogen. To make a son is risky, and I might be killed, but I have to take a chance. Brendan and Mark became good friends, and one day Mark asked Anna if he could ask Brendan to move in with them. Anna said yes. Brendan, and of course Einstein, could move in with them. A couple of years had passed, and Brendan, Mark, Anna, and Einstein lived very happily together. They finished the ship, and the main part of the ship was a sphere with 4 tentacles. The tentacles had smaller ships on them. Mark and Brendan called the main part of the ship Taurus, like the bull. It was now time to pick a crew. Brendan picked Mark, along with 3 of the crew from the fleet of ships on Mars. One was Pilot Neve, Pilot Dan, and of course, we can't forget Pilot Connor, the best pilot in the fleet. Brendan's plan was to send each of the crew on their own mission. Brendan was to light a cloud of helium that would make the sun and would allow the huge lifeless meteor to start life on it. And Mark's ship would be the probe that would jump into the future while the planet was in the Ice Age. His ship would heat up and melt through the ice, and when Brendan died, his particles would be collected inside the ship, and he would live on too. The other crew was to jump further into the future and help Mark and Anna be together, because one day, when they were building the ship, Mark asked Brendan, would love last forever? And Brendan said, if it was up to me, we would always be together, no matter what. Brendan and Mark eventually got the ship ready, and they told the council to be prepared to cut off the power of the reactor except for one room, where the pilots and Brendan would stay until they collected all the particles. So they did this, and it worked. They collected all the particles, every single last one, and they got ready to set off to the lifeless planet of Earth. That was just a ball of meteorites that hit off each other. There was a planet that hit the Earth and created the moon, but there was still no sun to create life. So Brendan and the crew, Mark, Neve, Dan, and of course Connor, the best pilot, set off and broke away from Taurus. Brendan set out to ignite the cloud of helium to create the sun. Mark's ship was set to jump into the future, to a time when planet Earth was in the Ice Age. Everything would work out, and Brendan seemed to know it would and kept saying, "It's our destiny." Mark ignited the cloud and created the sun, but he got jumped way into the future and got lost in the Middle Ages with King Arthur and the Round Table. Einstein was there too. The ship had run out of power, and they would have to charge the battery up. They hid the ship in a cave, and Brendan disguised himself as the king's jester, with Merlin as his friend. Mark jumped too. He came to Earth when it was the Ice Age. The ship was like a huge needle and melted through the ice and went under the sea. Brendan's life support went down and his particles went inside the ship. When the ship would heat up again, it would release the particles of the people of Mars, and Anna, and Mark. Dan's ship jumped into the future when Moses and the people of Egypt were running away from the Egyptians. They came to the Red Sea, with the Egyptians following after them. Dan saw that they were in trouble and used the power of his ship to part the Red Sea so the people could escape. Moses held up his staff. Dan saw this and said, "Okay, they need a hand." So he parted the sea. The people and Moses fled across. It took a couple of days for them to get to the other side. When they eventually got to the other side and the Egyptians came right behind them, and when they tried to cross, Dan let the sea close in again and the Egyptians were drowned. Connor jumped way into the future, but not too far. He wasn't far in front of Dan, as the case would be. He came and seen a little donkey with a lady holding a baby on its back, and a man guiding them through the night. They seemed to be fleeing from something. He could see that not far in Bethlehem, all the Roman soldiers were killing newborn babies, and a group of them were heading to the people who were escaping it. They went into a cave, and Connor used the power in his ship to communicate with the spiders and told them to build a web over the cave, so when the soldiers got there, they thought there was nothing inside. One time, Anna and Brendan met up again, but this was in Pompeii, and the volcano erupted, covering Pompeii in ash, but they were together. A time after that, they met up in the future once again. They were on a ship. It was called the Titanic, and it sunk, but they were together. Neve's ship had jumped into the future into the 50s, and it crashed in an area called Area 52. She was rescued by a young scientist from the new organization called NASA, and she would live on. Brendan was still stuck in the Middle Ages, being a bit of a hero helping out King Arthur and the people. Anna and Mark would meet up once again in the future. It was 2020, and there was a meteorite heading for the Earth. Once again, Mark and Anna were in trouble, and the people of Earth, and of course, the people of Mars, because once life ended on Earth, they would not exist anymore. Life would end. Brendan was still stuck in the Middle Ages, but his ship was powered up, so he jumped into the future. He got there just before the meteorite hit, and of course, Neve and the young scientist from NASA rebuilt her ship, and one extra just in case they found Mark. Dan's ship automatically jumped into the future. It was programmed so that Connor and Brendan would meet up again in the future. Neve flew her ship and the scientist's son flew Mars. When they all met up, they all connected to Taurus and reflected the power from Taurus to deflect the meteor away from Earth. And Mark and Anna and all the people of Earth and Mars were safe, and they all lived happily together.